That's 10 times the number of people who died in the World Trade Center.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Now, what about this guy? Was it last month? I think someone flew a plane into an IRS building in Texas.
Yeah, we had two similar incidents that occurred in February, and then more recently, just a few days ago, we had a kind of madman open fire on Pentagon police officers in the nation's capital.
And what about this the IRS plane guy? Was he part of the Patriot movement?
Well, I think, no, not precisely. Both of these men clearly were mentally ill. At the same time, both of them, I think, very clearly had kind of imbibed some of the ideas of the radical right. In the case of the IRS attacker, a man named Joseph Stack, he had actually met with anti-government groups, tax protest groups, groups that believe that the federal income tax is completely illegal, and so on. And, he talked about that a great deal in the manifesto he left before he died by driving that plane into the IRS building. In the case of the Pentagon shooter, this fellow wrote before he died, or actually said in a podcast, that he saw inside the government there was a, quote, tiny elite that was seeking to dominate and control the world. In other words, an idea very central to the New World Order conspiracy theorists.
Mark, we just got a question from someone Steve, who identified himself as a militiaman. It's kind of a multi-part question. I just want to kind of get you to respond to the first. What he basically asks or accuses us of is calling all of the militia, people involved in the militia movement, as haters. Is that what you're saying?
No, certainly I think one could probably fairly say that most people in the militia movement do hate the government, do see it as an evil thing. That's a little different, perhaps, than identifying, say, all black people as the object of your hatred. But, we've tried to be very careful to say we do not regard the so-called patriot groups as hate groups. They're really quite different. They are animated by different ideas, and really very different ideas. When you look at the hate groups, they are much less involved in conspiracy theorizing and secret plots and so on. Nevertheless, in all fairness, I've got to say to Steve that there are real streaks of racism in the militia groups, and there's no doubt at all that some of the central ideas, like the idea of sovereign citizenship, come straight out of racist groups or anti-Semitic groups of the 70s and 80s.
Mm-hmm. Mark, you mentioned the government and mentioned Obama earlier, and a lot of people have written questions to us, John from Pomona, Ashley from San Jose, wanting to know if there has been an increase in extremist activity related to Obama's rise to the presidency. How do you see that?
I don't think there's any question that that's true. From almost the moment that Obama was nominated at the Democratic National Convention in July of 08, we started to see just a string of remarkable things. That fall, even before the election, there were two different racist skinhead plots that targeted him for assassination. In between the election and the inauguration in December of 08, a man was found in Maine to be building a dirty bomb, a radioactive bomb, which he intended to set off at the inauguration of Obama. That man, as it happens, was shot and killed by his wife, and that's how the plot was uncovered. Another man, the day after Obama was inaugurated, walked out of his house in the suburbs of Boston and started murdering black people and intended to kill as many Jews as well as he could. Later told the police, allegedly, the reason he had done this was he'd been reading white supremacist websites and realized that the white race in America was being subjected to a genocide. So, there are many, many other instances. Almost all of what we've seen in terms of domestic terrorism or attempted domestic terrorism has been related to Obama. In addition to everything I've just said, there have been 6 law enforcement officers murdered in the first year of Obama's administration by people on the radical right.
And we supply a lot of our material to the law enforcement community, don't we, Mark?
That's right. Our feeling about that is that law enforcement officials, men and women who do that work, they're where the rubber meets the road. They are vastly more likely than you or I or any of our listeners to run into a person who poses a real danger, a physical danger. So yes, we do a lot of training of federal agents, of detectives, of police chiefs, and other law enforcement officials every year.
Now, we've talked a little bit about President Obama. We've talked a little bit about kind of the changing demographics and the anti-immigrant fervor out there, kind of some of this anti-government rhetoric altogether. What about the economy, Mark? What effect is that having, the collapse in the economy?
I think it has come to be an important part of what is driving this kind of explosion on the radical right. And you see that in a lot of ways. I mean, what happened right away after the subprime meltdown occurred was that conspiracy theory almost immediately appeared, which said that the reason the economy had imploded was that loans had been made, 5 million loans had been made to quote-unquote illegal aliens, to undocumented workers. And the claim was that these loans were forced by the Community Reinvestment Act, a federal law. As it turns out, we looked into this, it's utterly false. There's no basis for it at all. But that did not prevent that conspiracy theory from driving enormous numbers of people to essentially blame the poor, to blame undocumented immigrants, to just blame poor people for somehow sinking the banks. You know, I think since then the economy has played more and more. It's less about conspiracy theories now and more about the kind of anger that you see directed both at what are seen as undeserving elites, the bankers who got multi-million-dollar bonuses and so on, and what are seen also as equally undeserving sort of underclasses, right, poor people. There's a lot of anger directed at the poor who are seen to be somehow soaking the state and doing the rest of us in.
You know, you mentioned this earlier, Mark, and I know we had a lot of questions about it. Jason from Poughkeepsie, Ed from Barrington. People, probably 25, 30 questions have asked us about kind of the role of people like Glenn Beck, Fox News, and other really conservative media outlets out there, and in kind of legitimizing extremist ideas or promoting these ideas. What would you say about that?
I think that's absolutely true. And we've been talking about that for some time now because it's been so apparent in this kind of second era of the militia movement. You know, back in the 1990s, there was some of this. You had talk radio show hosts and a few politicians, especially out in western states, kind of talking up the militias and essentially endorsing them. But today, we have a person like Glenn Beck on Fox News who has an audience every day of 3 million people. You know, talking about are there or are there not FEMA concentration camps out there. We have a character like Lou Dobbs, formerly of CNN, talking about Mexico's secret plans of conquest, the so-called Reconquista. They're coming here to recapture the 7 American southwestern states. You know, but I should say that it is not all media commentators. The politicians, or many of them, have played a terrible role in this. So we have people like Michelle Bachmann, the congresswoman from Minnesota, saying that President Obama is secretly setting up political re-education camps in which presumably they're going to turn all of our children into little Marxist robots. We've got, you know, Spencer Baucus, another congressman from Alabama, saying that he knows there are 17 secret socialists in the U.S. Congress.
Sounds like McCarthy kind of stuff.
Yeah, right. He's not going to tell us who they are. But anyway, it goes on and on. I mean, I think when Sarah Palin talks about death panels, that is the same kind of grotesque misinformation. And of course, where this leads us as a country is, you know, we can't have a debate about immigration. We have to talk about secret invasion plans. We can't talk about health care. We have to talk about why Obama wants to murder our grandma to save, you know, $5. So this is very harmful stuff, I think, very destructive of democratic discourse.
Now, you know, Mark, I know, so I've gotten some emails about it, that Rush Limbaugh has recently been on your case. What's all that about? Why are you riling Rush up of all people, Mark?
Well, what a mistake, right? I mean, I remember it's happened a few times, but most dramatically, one day, I think it was sometime last year, Rush started to talk about Obama, and he was talking about a particular incident on a school bus in which it appeared that some black kids were attacking a white kid. He said, and I quote, "In Obama's America, the white kids now get beat up with the black kids cheering." And then he went on to suggest, perhaps sarcastically, that we now needed segregated school buses. Well, I made some comment about that on Hardball on the MSNBC show with Chris Matthews, and Limbaugh went after me in quite a hammer and tong way. And really, the punchline of the story is that we received more threats, more vicious phone calls and emails than we ever get from taking on the Klan or neo-Nazi group.